model you're going to use. So which LLM. And this was really good. Depending on the task, you can choose what is best for that. As well as you can manage costs, because if you are paying for this stuff and you've ran out of free credits, you're switching over to the next best model, right? The other thing that CodeGPT did really well was it gave you some predefined prompts. So you can see explain, like you're a new developer in a new code base, explain to me what this piece of code is doing. Imagine you work in the front end and you want to understand back end. Now you can go into the Java code base or Python code base and like, explain this to me and explain it to me like I'm a front end engineer. Next, you have writing tests, you have find bugs, optimize, and refactor. So just having these predefined prompts was also really, really powerful. And of course, it's a plugin. So wherever you are, whatever coding IDE experience you like, these two tools were able to be embedded in there. But Cursor came out. Cursor came out mid-2024, and this was very, very different. This was a full IDE experience. It's built off of VS Code, so that is actually one of the problems. So if you weren't familiar with VS Code and you were editing in a different tool such as like IntelliJ products, this was a big thing to adopt. But we're actually going to talk about how this was adopted and why we chose to go with Cursor. So this is the timeline. Back in September, Cursor started making some noise in the market. The team at Navan was already like proficient in Copilot, GPT, but in October, we started hearing it from companies openly saying, hey, this is what we're using. And Stitch is a authentication company. So think like Okta, things that manage your identity management. So security is very, very important to them. And when you are actually using a full IDE experience, it has access to all of your code. And so you are concerned with what is it indexing, what is it actually seeing, and what are they doing with it? And so for a company that their main product is identity management and security, for them to openly say like, yes, you have to use this. That was like a really big thing for us. So in October, there was an internal push to get people to go after this. But in December is when we started to test and review it. So in between October and December, we're trying to figure out who's going to fund this. Because it's not just the budget of who's going to pay for all of these engineers to use it, but you have to be willing to put your team, your projects at risk and say, you're going to pilot this. You may actually slow down your productivity, but you have to do that, and you have to have some sort of format to evaluate these. So come January, after a proof of concept, it was a new year, a new editor, and as of today, behavior has shifted. And we're gonna look at what I've learned and kind of some of the trends that I see both with my experience, my team, the organization, as well as people who I work with outside of that in just the overall industry. So when you are trying to evaluate which IDE experience or whatever coding agent you want to do, you need a framework essentially. And this is what I recommend to really determine whether or not your company should adopt, this tool or another tool. The first is a range of experience. A more experienced engineer, such as a senior engineer versus a junior engineer, new grad, their ability to adopt and leverage this is going to be important, right? So you need both ends of the spectrum to run through the rest of these testing scenarios. Next, you need different stacks. The most common is back-end and front-end, and that's what most engineering teams and or companies have the most of, right? And so you want to take someone who's very experienced in one or the other to also evaluate this. Next, you have to fully immerse them, right? You can't just have them like tiptoe around, right? You need to just have them 100%, this is the editor that they're gonna use. And then you need different types of projects. As all of you know, if you have any sort of thing, any type of project, you have new code. New code is always the easiest code to build, right? Because you don't have to worry about anything else. There is no impact yet. The next is refactoring. This is where someone needs to understand what the system does and how is it going to change. Next is extending. Like you have this, imagine like you have a building and now you want to add a room to the building, right? Can it follow the guidelines, the style, everything in there? Bug fixes. Is it able to identify bug fixes, right? Usually a developer knows in their mind, you could just describe to them the problem, like I kind of know where it's at, but can the AI do that? And then testing, we already knew AI was great at writing tests, but can it do it in an agentive way? Can it do it on its own and do it effectively? So this is the data that I recommend tracking. This is both qualitative and quantitative. The first being is usage. How much is it used? And you can actually measure this in Cursor. You can see how many requests are being made by which developer, right? If you're looking at ChatGPT, right, you could actually see again how many requests, so you can actually understand who's using it more, who's using it less. But you want to ask, what are they using it for, right? Are they asking it to just refactor a bunch of stuff, write tests, because that'll give you more context. You want to see if is it increasing velocity. Anyone who's in software knows that velocity is an important thing, but it's a little unclear how you track that, because that could be, are you delivering the expected amount of work in a period of time, or are you actually producing more code? And we can measure that through GitHub metrics, right, or GitLab metrics. So velocity is going to be your company or just like your team specific measurement. Next is code volume. And you can measure this by commit size as well as number of pull requests. But what you have to be careful with code volume is people think more is better. That is absolutely not the case, right? More code, more problems, right? It's very simple, like it's just more stuff to maintain. Next, you're gonna look at quality, and this is bugs produced. You can actually look at the exceptions, so errors, and you can do this through your observability tools such as Datadog, New Relic. So you're actually measuring this over a given time period. And then complexity. We have static tool analysis that tell us how complex is a specific code, and you can actually track that over time too. So we have analysis just measuring like cognitive complexity. So imagine if you were writing a book, is the book at a 5th grade level or is it at a collegiate level? Collegiate level doesn't actually mean it's good, right? It means it's harder for other people to understand. And then lastly, which I think is the more important piece, that this is why tools like this are really important, is the developer experience. Are engineers happy using it? So I'm gonna walk you through a demo. It's about 10 minutes. I wanted to do it live, but when you start to work with AI, you don't know if the request and the prompt that you're asking is gonna take 15 seconds or is it gonna take 15 minutes, right? There is a range of that. But what I am gonna show you is this cursor that I just downloaded is default settings. So there is no additional work that I put into it to like massaging and setting up any settings, rules, anything like that. So this is, if you were to download Cursor today, this is the experience you will get. I also had a demo app like prepared so we can like start to extend and like improve things and put some additional features in. And let's take a look. So this is a new app I just pulled down from GitHub. It knows nothing about the application, but I just told it start the app. It's reviewing all of the code, trying to figure out what command do I need to run. And now it's finding the command. But what's actually really interesting is because this is default cursor, it's not going to run the command in the terminal. There is a setting here called YOLO mode. And YOLO mode, you know, if you know what YOLO is, I'm actually gonna stop it and say, use YOLO mode, and I'm gonna give it the command again, start my app, and this time it's actually gonna run that command. So now it has full control over my terminal, and it can start to execute stuff. You could see where it could honestly just delete everything on my computer if it wanted. So you know, you gotta be careful with it, but I work in YOLO mode. It is just, it's what I do. Cool, so now it started the app. It's running on port 3000. I'm just gonna do some quick QA, just make sure the app is still running, make sure some of the stuff is working. Cool, I can make some changes, things are updating. I'm happy now. So now we're on to really the next task. Right here, this app in particular doesn't have delete functionality, but you could see I can multi-select some stuff, and you know, the delete button shows, you know, delete n number of items, but when I try to delete it, nothing happens. So now let's see what cursor can do. I'm gonna ask it to specifically make the delete functionality work. And I'm, you know, trying to be specific. I'm saying when I press the delete button with one or more items, it should properly delete those. I also said delete order functionality. This is going to be important because I didn't realize this when I was prompting it. I told it to delete the orders. There's actually other things in the system that I want it to delete, and I didn't realize that as I was having the conversation. But I can also show you how right now, like one of the things, like as you're producing a lot of code, you need to review it. In YOLO mode, it's just making all these changes, but you can actually review code in cursor line by line. So imagine if you had a pull request and you're looking at a diff of code, you can actually verify line by line what's happening, as well as it's showing you over here the summary of what it's doing. And this is really important because maybe I just disagree with that. I could reject it right there. You can actually accept the whole file. You can see there, so if there is a bunch of other changes, you can accept those. But as of now, it's going through and it has added the delete order functionality. And we're gonna go take a look at this right after I just verify some more changes. I'm like, this looks good. Very tedious. So quickly, I'm just like, all right, we're just gonna accept everything. I don't have time for this. And yeah, kind of review some more stuff. I'm like, forget it, accept it all. Now, again, I'm testing to make sure, like, does it do what I want it to do? Cool. And it's working. Now, this is the fun part. It accepts context. I just went online, I went to dribble.com, which is like pictures of like, you know, cool pieces of UI. I looked for a confirmation dialog and I found some that I liked, and I'm like screenshotting it. And I'm gonna just drop it into the chat here. So now it has a picture. And I want the delete functionality to prompt me with this confirmation. I told it to use my style tokens. So I gave it some additional context about the code base, but I gave it liberty on the red and the iconography. Like, just do as you wish. And it's going and creating this. But again, it says orders. This is where, as the user, and I'm not paying attention because I'm asking it something and I'm on my phone. I'm not even looking at it. I'm getting up, doing stuff, but you can see I'm actually on the products page and I'm trying to test this delete. I'm like, why isn't it working? So, like anyone, I'm like, it's not appearing, fix it, right? Because I'm lazy at this point. So it's like, okay, let me go look, and it tries to determine what is the problem. And, you know, I can see like, oh, okay, maybe the overlay, maybe it's there, but like other stuff is on top of it, like the Z index is off. And I'm like, verifying, okay, sounds good. Continue, let me test again. Still on the products page, not paying attention to what it did and what I'm actually verifying. Still not working, what's wrong, right? Because at this point, I want it to be smart. And again, still on the products page, I'm getting frustrated. And when you ask it to do something and you come back and you're just trying to verify, like, what did it do? I'm just like, okay, stop. I tell it to stop, and now I'm just full argument mode. I'm telling it, like, be specific, start to be systematic, and it actually starts to write log statements and log all the behavior that it's doing, because it's like, you're telling me something's wrong. Let me go put some logging in there, and you'll start to see it in the console here, where it's now debugging like an engineer on its own. Finally, I realized, like, oh, wrong place. Like, great, it's working. I was on the products page, not the orders page. And it's like, oh, like, good to know. But I also am unhappy because it didn't make it look like the picture. So now I'm like, all right, we have to do some more work, kind of more massaging, like, it needs to listen. Like, fix the layout. I'm gonna screenshot the image. Actually, I didn't have the image here, so I'm gonna go screenshot it one more time. All right. So, and this happens, right? You have to check its work and really, like, guide it to the solution. Finally, it does what I want it to do. It looks good enough for me. I do some more tests, kind of test the other areas. I'm happy. Now we're on to the next task. So what you saw there was, like, delete, right? There was a confirmation, and that's the only time a confirmation will appear. As an engineer, I know I need something more generic. I want it to extend this behavior. So I'm actually asking it to create a dialogue service. So abstract that behavior, because as you saw, like, there's a confirm, there's a warning message, and even in the example that I saw from Dribble, you know, there's different things. There's a success one, right? So I tell it to now abstract the behavior, make it more reusable, because I want to use this in more places under more use cases. And I learned my lesson. I'm like, and make sure it works, right? So now review your own work, basically. So it now gives me the summary of what it did. Then I'm going to just make sure it's still working. Everything that was there is still working as expected. All right. So this is going to be where things get really fun, because now I just created this abstract dialogue service. I want it to create documentation for it, because as it creates documentation, not only can other engineers leverage that to learn how to use it, but now it can also learn from its own documentation. I also told it to write some tests for me. You may have missed that, but I did ask for it to write tests. And I'm also asking, like, do they work? Because I know I have to be specific. So it runs it, and sure enough, one's failing. So it knew it failed, and now it's automatically fixing that stuff on the fly for me. I don't even have to tell it. Cool. So now the tests are all passing and everything's good. So far you've seen a few things, right? You've seen we added some context, right? We've saw it made some mistakes, and the mistakes were actually from me not paying attention, but it still was like, okay, I'm going to iterate and try to figure out what you're saying, because something isn't working, right? So it started to debug. Then we extracted that behavior, made it more general. We then created documentation for it, and it wrote tests. Now we need to get some rules in there, because I can't be there to, like, constantly tell it what to do and pay attention. So we're gonna create some standardization in this environment. I'm going into the settings here, and I'm gonna create user roles. there are rules now that you can put at the project level, but these user rules are going to tell it, I want you to write tests. If there are no tests, create the tests. Make sure the tests always run. Here's some document. I want you to also document things. And if the documentation's not there, create it. And I also want you to create it in a very, very specific format. So we know there's documentation, we know there's tests in the system. So now we're gonna tell it, if you just saw that just like a little bit ago, here we go. So now the rules are in there. We're gonna tell it to create a success dialogue. I know it didn't create that, so we're gonna just screenshot that. And what you're gonna see is it's going to update documentation on the fly. It's also going to write tests. Actually, I think it just implements it and writes tests. I have to actually remind it to write the documentation. So as it goes through, it's generating. Okay, so now it's running the tests as it's supposed to based on the rules, and it says they're passed. Okay, but I know something's off, right? Because at this point I'm paying attention, and I'm like, use all the rules. You forgot an important rule about documentation. And it's like, you're right. Let me go and update the documentation. But because there was documentation there, not only did it need to update it with the new behavior, but it also needed to update it based on the format I want my documentation to be in. So it created the new format, added context for all of those things, examples, and now from this point on, anything I do in this editor, it's going to follow those rules. It's going to create tests, run tests, it's going to create documentation, make sure it's all in the right format, so it'll clean up as I go. This stuff may not even be there, and there could just be new stuff, and it'll just always have that. And this is the power of an agentic IDE experience, where now there are these triggers that instead of you remembering to do this stuff, it's going to do this stuff for you. So, some of the things we've learned at scale, we're talking through quality right now. There are 4 key areas in quality. One is standardization. Assembly is required, and I'll talk about that. The quality overall is there, and then system level thinking. So when it comes to standardization, if your code base doesn't have standards, if it doesn't have a style guide, it's going to get very unmaintainable. Imagine having, hundreds of engineers trying to produce code autonomously, and they can do it however they want, right? So you need standards. Even if you're coding and you want your friend to come in and help you on something, and they start doing things different, you're like, hey, don't do that, right? But you need the AI to understand that. If you have third-party libraries that you use in your code base, you want to set the standard and say, we use these libraries, right? If you're gonna bring in a new library, make sure you ask, because bringing in a new library can, really increase your bundle size, right? Increase your package size. So you want to make sure you tell it, hey, these are approved. Don't use anything without asking. What internal things are built? As you saw when I told it, hey, use these style tokens, I was giving it context like, hey, make sure you use what's built. Don't just go build new things. And then what norms are there? When you work with people, you'll realize maybe if you write code, you always do something, right? How can you make sure that the AI does that? Anything that is tribal knowledge, that needs to be set as a rule.
I have a question. Do you keep it on the same default AI model?
I'm using Claude 3.7 and sometimes Thinking, but I'm usually using the latest model. So yeah, Cursor has a bunch of updates for that. And I'll actually talk more about that a little later. So, assembly required. If you asked AI to give you a car, are you getting a Hummer or are you getting a Prius? The fact that you don't know is the problem. And so what an engineer should be doing is they need to balance components versus features. When you are asking AI to do something, you want to be very specific. You want to say, I'm looking for a search functionality, right? That's great. You're thinking at the feature level. But when you start to think about the pieces of a feature, that is where things get really powerful and you can build something way more robust. And so being able to go between the feature and component level is going to be a skill that people will have to develop a lot further. Overall, quality is there. I'm very happy with it. Companies are very happy with it. You do need guardrails, right? So if you're coding on your own project, you probably don't have testing in place. You're probably not even getting your code reviewed by someone else, right? But at scale, this is happening, and this will ensure the quality is there. And if you can, you want to do it granularly. And that's why Cursor excels, right? Seeing those line by line changes and being able to accept, that is very powerful. And then it can make mistakes. You saw that it did some things, like it didn't remember to do stuff. Honestly, the overall output outweighs any of those infrequent issues, right? Like a good engineer can catch those, as well as our testing and our review process will ensure those things don't happen. And then, yeah, like I said, issues, you want them caught ahead of time through the review process. So, systems thinking. Engineers should be aiming to become a product engineer. You need to be super involved at the business level, understanding the overall system, because you're going to have a much broader scope. And it's no longer about like those implementation details. Like it can be when necessary, but you don't have to think and worry about that as much anymore. So how has this affected people? More experienced engineers are being enhanced. Less experienced engineers are not gaining depth, and that gap is widening. So an experienced engineer, them getting better and them being able to use a tool and to know how the system works and to know exactly what I want, that is so much easier for them. A less experienced engineer doesn't have the depth of knowledge, so it can't tell when it's doing something wrong, right? And that is starting to be perpetuated more and more. And then any lack of experience using a coding agent requires it. It results in a lot of trial and error. You could see, even for me, like if I'm lazy, I'm just like, just go on, like try it again. Reluctance and skepticism. The more experienced you are, the more skeptical you are of it, naturally. And then, knowing when to use AI is a big differentiator. And then the more experienced you are, the more opinionated you are. So you actually will have more stylistic concerns about what it's doing. Imagine you're a writer, you care more about punctuation than someone who doesn't write for a living. And then muscle memory. So you can't underestimate shortcuts. When you take someone out of an environment where they've been coding and they have all this muscle memory, and you take them out and you throw them into a new editor, that is very problematic. The shortcuts don't do the same thing. It starts to slow them down. So I've done this, and I still see people do it today. They have their favorite coding editor, the one that they're used to, and then they have Cursor. Right? Cursor is doing the thing, and then they're using the other editor to basically explore and try to figure out like where and what am I doing. So they might have two editors open. And then plugins helped with that. That's why CodeGPT and Copilot were helpful, because you could stay where you're used to things. But someone like an iOS engineer, if they work in Xcode, they're not going to leave to use Cursor. Right? So like I said, muscle memory is still important. So, people, this is exactly what it feels like. This is an image of like someone just farming, and it's like cursors down, writing organic, farm raised, non-GMO code by hand, the way our ancestors used to do it. This is a reality, right? This is kind of what it feels like now. Like things are changing, and a lot of people don't even understand fundamentals because frameworks abstracted those, and now people are using AI and they're learning even less. So the main use cases that I see the most productivity coming from, test coverage was always there. That was always good. Now it's agentic. Full code generation is used more than autocomplete now. Documentation, that, as you saw, is super helpful, as well as it helps the AI understand what's already in the code base. Pull request reviews. So not only do we use AI to generate code, we also use AI to review the code. You can see where there could be a problem, but it's more about, hey, can AI just check more specifically, is there optimizations? Is there improvements? Can we make things more clear? As well as we use AI to diagram the flow of our code. So we can actually diagram things and allow someone else reviewing what's actually happening here. And then exploration. Engineers are able to now build more stuff, more proof of concepts. I'm exploring, like, should we really be paying for this like little tool, or should we just build this in-house now? Right? So we are actually able to spend more time solving different types of problems. Some gotchas. This, I think, is what you should be keeping an eye out for. So when you were using chat-based, right, which is like CodeGPT, like those plugins, Copilot, it resulted in very specific changes because you were copying and pasting code, right? It couldn't do much more than that. Now there's lots of code that's being produced, and so it starts to do more. So depending on what you ask it, as well as how proactive you are, you may get a lot more changes than you were expecting, which will have more ripple effects, more testing you'll have to do, more verification that it did the right thing. So frequent places where it will increase scope is linting. So if you have like some syntactical errors, it will try to fix that at whatever cost it takes, right? So it will start to change settings if it needs to fix stuff. If you use a strongly typed language and you want to change and update an interface, that interface, wherever it's going to be used, that's now all of the surface area that is impacted. And then adding packages. If it knows that there's a package out there that'll result in what it wants, it'll just go and download it. Or you need to tell it, hey, don't do that, we have something already, or build it on your own, right? So that's where the scope of the changes continue to increase. Context loss. You need to break up your work in manageable chunks. When it comes to increasing velocity, any engineer will know that when you have smaller tasks, it's a lot easier to deliver those tasks more effectively. Same thing with AI. You want to work in specific coding chunks. So a 2-hour session with AI is like 8 hours. And so what you can do in 2 hours of like paying attention is usually more than enough. But anything longer than that, you should have like absolutely saved your code changes. You should have had commits along the way. And so 2 hours is max the amount of time you should be spending with code through AI. And then over time, it'll lose context. So if I come back the next day, I need to remind it what we did, right? So you want to just make sure that if there's been a few hours of inactivity, you just start to remind it again, hey, remember, we were doing this thing, and, you know, follow the rules. So yeah, you just want to do that. And then laziness. You could be as detail oriented as you want, but you will be lazy. And this is what it feels like. I feel like this when it's just not listening to me. It's like a child, and I don't know how many times I have to say this. Cursor's like, I don't know how to make him say the right thing because I don't understand him. Yeah, this is really what it starts to feel like. So, future evaluations. You want to stay ahead of the curve, and there are 4 things that are just non-negotiable at this point when it comes to AI coding editors. 1, it needs to be context-based. You need to be able to provide it links, articles, any sort of online references, images, internal documentation. You need to be able to give it that as context. No editor right now supports video, but once video is there, and within the next like 3 months, it'll probably be there where you can just drop a video in as context. But that is required for any tool that I will ever consider working with. The next is choice of model. You have to be able to choose the model that's going to serve your task the best. It needs to be agentive. I want it to now do things at bulk. It needs to make edits on the fly. It needs to be able to think and iterate the way I would do it myself. And then I need rules. I need to be able to set boundaries for it. There are 3 coding editors that are really popular. Cursor is leading the pack. There's also Tray, and then Windsurf. The reason Windsurf is last is they were a plugin before, and then they just shifted over to a full editor. But I'm in the process of reviewing these, and even though like those could be good, I also need to manage costs, right? Like, so at the end of the day, what's going to give us the best results, and what's going to be affordable. So plugin versus IDE, everyone is shifting to an IDE experience. DevX is going to be important. Developers have to enjoy it. They have to be able to like do their key bindings and make sure their shortcuts are working. And then of course, we're going to be managing costs. So overall trends. This is trends both internally at scale, what I'm seeing personally as like an engineering leader. So as an engineering leader, I don't have time to code. Like I just don't. I'm more concerned about the overall execution of like business deliverables. But 1 hour of me coding is like 5 hours, right? So something that before I would just like, it's not even worth me doing it because I probably won't finish it. Now I'm like, oh, I'll actually deliver this. And so overall, we do see an increase in productivity. Time savings, it is safe to say it's like an engineer getting an extra work week. So at 25% increased productivity, that's 1 extra day of coding per week. And at the month level, that's an entire week of coding. Adoption matters. So most engineers at large are pushing Cursor. They're saying you need to be using Cursor in some way, shape, or form. But the main takeaway I want you to understand is like measuring like velocity is a little bit of like an art, right? Velocity, you can produce a bunch of code, right? You can make many changes, but at the end of the day, you want to be measured on impact. And your company and your team and your KPIs will determine what impact actually means. So if you're on a team that builds software for developers, right? Like you're in an internal team, if you are saving developers time, that is a big impact. Or if you are reducing bugs for the customer, that's a big impact. So velocity is just like one piece of it. And depending on how the developer adopts it and the type of work that the developer has will determine how powerful this can be. So in summary, really like we explored how the coding agent's working, how we're using it, what you need to do to evaluate and ensure like, is this tool the right tool for me? And then we understood that depending on the type of work, right, it can be more or less helpful. So if you are building something brand new for a client, it's super helpful. It knows everything. If you have existing code that's been developed for years, it's going to be a little harder for it, right? Because now there's all this old code, and we know how old code is. We look at it a week ago and we're like, why did we write this, right? And so depending on the type of task, the type of work, it can be more or less helpful. But the last thing is, and this, like, I really, like, you guys really got to, like, hone in on this. Coding is the bare minimum. Like, the hard skills is the bare minimum, because now I can give a tool like this to a non-technical person and they can deliver a high quality product. So an engineer now needs to focus on the overall longevity of the system, the maintainability, and all of the other things that are going to help them collaborate, to think long term, to deliver overall business value. And that's why they need to be shifting to product engineers, and not just like these engineers that do a specific thing and that's what they're an expert in. The best engineers know that AI is not a replacement. Instead, they use their experience to guide it towards a clear goal and focus on impact, not code output. So I thought to myself, like, you know, in this presentation, I only have so much time. I think one person has their computer in the back. He's probably working on Cursor. I don't know. But I wanted you guys to, like, have a framework to understand how to think about using AI. And I know that, like, I want you to be empowered, right? Like, I want you to go home, like, download this, check it out. But I also want to save you time and, like, let you learn from what I've seen. So next Thursday at 6 p.m. online, I'm just going to do a free engineering productivity masterclass where we're going to dive in. You're going to download Cursor. We're going to set up the rules both at the IDE level, at the project level, and we're just going to walk through how to set this up, and we're going to build some stuff together. Yeah, and, like, there was no way we're going to be able to do that here and, like, really, like, you guys get the best experience. So yeah, if you scan that one, you'll be able to sign up, and yeah, we'll get you guys up and running and really, like, developing with Cursor. And then the other one, like I said, if you want to get connected, you can do that there. So yeah, that is it. I want to thank Tim. Thank you for letting me come talk about AI. Okay. Questions?
You didn't talk much about the integration of a tool like Cursor and some of the other tools around the project, like maybe using Jira, some of the issue tracking tool. You didn't talk about how product management or product owners might use the tool to refine their feature requests and user stories, and how those can then be better understood and ideated and finally implemented by engineers. I'm just wondering if you guys have had any luck in making those integrations pop.
Yes. Okay. So where is, like, the overall market going? It's about orchestration, right? Now we're trying to figure out, we can code, right? We can now integrate with GitHub. We can make it review our code, but now we need to start to use, like, webhooks to go to Jira, automate some things. So, like, right now as, like, tickets move through swim lanes, it updates statuses in GitHub, right? So that's already there. But it's now, how do we get everyone thinking about the same thing, right? I think you're going to see a shift of software engineers trying to be product managers starting to code more. And so there's a tool out there, or a framework, called Gherkin syntax. The Gherkin syntax is a way to describe user behavior. So if any of you have heard of test-driven development or behavioral-driven development, Gherkin describes the behavior. So a user is going to do this, then this happens, right? And so if your product requirements can start to be written in a format like that, that can start to be your input to what you're trying to build, right? And so that's why, like, I want engineers to now step away from code and just actually think about things more holistically, get more involved in the requirements gathering to understand what needs to get built. And yeah, so if you can start to orchestrate all of your tools and integrate them, I think that's going to be like really powerful. And you saw documentation. I want documentation to live with the code, because now it's way easier for the AI to understand it and the developer to have this stuff updated on the fly. And so yeah, like I do expect more orchestration around several different tools.
Another question?
Yeah.
Okay. So another big challenge in engineering organization is the collection and institutionalization of knowledge. In other words, quality centers of excellence, things of that nature. And so one of the things that I've seen people starting to do is take all of those sorts of knowledge about an organization's best practices, reference architectures, institutional knowledge in general, and put it in a format that then can be used by an LLM to do RAG to help engineers that are trying to solve problems ask questions of that central resource and say, hey, what's the best way to do this? How is it usually done? Have you guys done something about that?
So at Navan, we do use AI, and we use it in the product. One of the main ways, and you actually see our CTO talk about a lot, is through the support experience. So it is kind of chat-based, but imagine you are traveling and your flight gets canceled. And so you go on to support and you, hey, my flight's canceled, I need another flight. We're actually able to push 60% of all support requests through the AI. That means only 40% actually have to be resolved by a human. And we do that by actually it understanding our system and building some models that know how the system works. And so they can talk to each other now.
But the audience there were your consumers. I was thinking about the audience being the engineers trying to play well with others in the larger engineering context.
So we talked about like exploration, right? We haven't built a way for it to like know the entire system, right? Because now you're looking at an entire Git repository, which has about 400, an entire company in GitHub, right? Where there's 400 repositories and you're looking across all of them. But what we can do is give it access to Confluence, other documentation. And what you didn't see was when you set up rules, you can give that context. If you have any sort of article out there describing something or any documentations from a framework that you've used, you can embed that into rules so it knows, hey, this is how we're building it and this is why we did some things. So yeah, you can actually add that as context. So not quite what you're looking for of like, this is all the internal stuff, but depending on how you have it set up and how available it is, it will be able to access that.
Yeah. So as part of your testing and like transitioning, I imagine you have some people who code and then use Cursor to sort of improve the code, and then you have some people who use a prompt and then review that. Like, did you find one was better than the other? Like, what do you see the direction going?
There's people who are reluctant, right? And so they tend to be safer and they'll write code and then ask for it to improve it. One of the things I didn't particularly mention was I recently had some conversations with some engineers earlier in their career. And I said, don't use AI right now. Like specifically, it is not helping you learn. And the team is spending more time trying to review code because you're producing a lot more stuff that is actually like, it's not even needed, right? And so when I see that, it's depending on how you ask it to do stuff and how specific you can be, you're gonna get different results. And so when you're lazy and you say, give me a car, all of a sudden there's more to review, right? And so some engineers are doing a little bit of both. I personally wanna get as specific as possible, and I'm starting to commit more often, right? There is some history that you can go through to like go back to a previous checkpoint. But what I'm trying to do is I write code, I commit that code, and then I'll have AI do its changes, and then I'll have it commit that code so I can actually see the difference between the AI code and my code, and like we're just like coding together, right? So that's my specific style, and like some people are gonna do what works for them for whatever the task is.
So you would normally start first and then have it
Yeah.
take a second.
Yeah, so an engineer, like as if there's a bug and I can tell you the bug, I'm like, hey, like customer was dealing with this issue, you already have an idea in your head, so you can probably drill down much quicker and maybe even make that change, as opposed to asking it to fix something and you're just kind of like describing the problem. You may have more changes than expected, right? Just to fix that thing, when you know one line will do it, right? It will tend to create a more robust solution to the problem, right? So yeah, it just kind of depends on what you're trying to do. Yeah. Yeah.
My question is kind of about the idea of like switching your team over to a new IDE. And I have a couple of questions about that. So like one question I have is like, how do you deal with the issue of like integrations? Like there are products that are like very standardized across the industry, and like you'll start to see like, you know, for example, Figma VS Code plugin, right? Things like that. So when a product is so heavily standardized, such as VS Code, how do you decide like, okay, does this support the integrations that my team needs? Like, or maybe it's such a new product that, you know, there aren't so many integrations and that might, you know, interrupt productivity.
Okay, so have you ever used anything other than VS Code?
Not really, no. Not
Okay.
as like a daily driver. I've used other things, but not that heavily.
Okay, so VS Code is open source, right? When you get into the IDEs of like pay to play, such as like IntelliJ products, that is standardized. VS Code is actually on the other spectrum, where a lot more people are building plugins for it, and it's highly customizable. So one person's VS Code setup between another is different, which is actually why I don't like it. I use IntelliJ, and it's like a framework, right? If you're thinking like React versus Angular, Angular has all the things you need and it's way heavier and it takes up more space. Same thing with like IntelliJ. VS Code is very lightweight, and most people use it because it's free. And because of that, a lot of people develop all of these extra plugins. Moving the team and trying to say you have to use this, we don't even do that. But what we are saying is you can use this if you want, and we will pay for it. At the end of the day, if I get the same output between two engineers, I don't care. I don't care what you just use Notepad, and if that works for you, then like we're good.
Because I was going to mention that too. Like,
Yeah.
It's funny how we're talking about stay focused on the problem and not the solution, right? And
But here's the thing, right? Like if I could get an engineer who's great already, who's not using AI, and I can amplify them, that is way better than just someone who's not very good and them getting a little better, right? If I can just make someone more efficient, like the best engineers, I absolutely want them, and I'm gonna ask them like, hey, like, are you trying to use this because the gap is closing between those using AI and those who are not? Those who are using it can do more, and so if you're already great, you are gonna be amplified significantly. Yeah.
So a comment to your point, I use Visual Studio IDE for most of my work, and there's literally nothing missing from that environment, but Copilot sucks. So I have Cursor pointing to the same project that I'm working on, and I use both side by side, and it works great.
So
Yeah.
you would say that it's so much better than Copilot that you.
Oh my God, Copilot is
Yeah.
absolutely not as good.
Yeah.
The difference is that, and maybe it'll catch up, don't get me wrong, but it's also only one model. And first of all, Cursor is a fork of Visual Studio Code. Visual Code, right? So all the plugins that you've grown to love, it sounds like you're a Visual Code guy. You just use them.
Yeah.
All right. But if you're using Visual Studio IDE, you've got an excellent debugger, you've got profiling, you've got all sorts of other stuff going on. that is standardized, it's optimized for that environment, and so it's hard to beat, right? Plus, it's been around 35 years, so it's been a lot of time to improve. So by using the two side by side, you get all the benefits of Cursor and any plugins you might use, like editing YAML files in Visual Studio IDE sucks. It's great in Cursor. So, you know, you can have both tools up and it works out real well.
Yeah, as you like, some of the tools are going to have different things. Like, so in like the JetBrains, right, jumping between different signatures, right, and being able to like to command click, being able to search your code base, it works differently. And so we actually tried to look for plugins that give us that same type of functionality in the VS Code, like cursor-based stuff.
For what it's worth, Microsoft just released a whole set of plugins for C# and Visual Code that
Yeah.
make it reasonable to use that as your primary development environment if that's what you want to do. So you don't have to use Visual Studio IDE, especially if you're working on a Mac or working in Linux or something.
Yeah.
One more question.
Mhm.
You didn't touch on this, but I thought I would ask you if folks are doing it. One of the hardest things that, as a manager of programmers, you have to do is get people to write reasonable synopses of what they've just done for their check-ins. So when you go back and you're looking at a pull request,
Yeah.
you don't have to go and look at all the code changes to know what they did.
Mm.
They actually have written something that's reasonable. Are you finding that Cursor is generating reasonable check-in synopses that you guys use, or are you discouraging your use?
So one of the things we use like Cursor for, and like we have also like tools built in GitHub, so we'll have like that runs our pipeline. So GitHub Actions, we have a PR template that like will describe and expect certain things to be in there to describe, you know, what's happening. And the updates that I'm actually really big on updates, because I think when an engineer can look back and think about what they did and have it written down, we can start to, again, see trends. And as an engineering manager, there's expectations versus reality. I was expecting some things to be done, but in reality, time was spent differently. And engineers don't do a good job of surfacing what they're doing, which also hurts them because they don't get the recognition, right? And so if they're using AI, like they can use it. They write daily updates, weekly updates. If they want to use AI to like enhance it, by all means, but you're also giving a lot of liberty to the AI to determine really what you want surfaced to your manager, right? So yeah, like I said, recognition is it's a big problem for software engineers, and they should be surfacing, escalating things, and they also need to be aware of what they're doing and how they're spending their time.
Perfectly into the next question. PR review,
Yep.
right?
Yeah.
So are you guys using Cursor in the PR review process? In other words, does this code follow all our standards? Does this code further the objective of the user story that they're working on, so on and so forth? I mean, are you guys using it as an augmentation of the PR review process so that it's more timely and more comprehensive?
No, we have different AI tools to just analyze the pull requests specifically. And, you know, with the way I'm trying to code, which is make my changes and then it make its changes, right? That will like help balance it out. That way when you read commits, you know what was done by a human versus what was done by an AI. And every single code base has different rules and different PR templates. So when you do create a pull request in this code base, it might be important that you follow, you know, this pattern. And so that'll be enforced. Same way, like if you have linting, right? You're gonna have different rules for different things. Yeah, and you kind of just like take it code base by code base. But yeah, we have separate tools specifically integrated through GitHub to analyze the pull requests, to review it, as well as like static code analysis, right? Like I talked about the complexity, code duplication, unit test coverage. We have tools that just analyze that stuff.
Compliance. All
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, security. Yep.
Cool.
Any other questions, comments? Got really quiet. Yeah.
I guess I'd comment just making sure you use these AI tools, use them with thoughtfulness. Like, because what you're doing is you're committing the code and then you're having AI review it. I like having AI write it and then explain it to me and how it's doing it. So I think just using that, having that thoughtfulness is an important part of utilizing it effectively, which is I think what you're getting at.
Yeah, and like in that masterclass, like we'll actually go through kind of the different levels of like accuracy you have to provide it, and for you wanted to explain it. One of the things I have it do is, if I have a rule, tell me what rule you're following right now, and so like depending on how you want to set it up for whatever you feel comfortable with, like you should have like the autonomy to do that. But when you're in a company too, you want it to be standardized so like your peer is following the same processes, right? So yeah, I think just intentionality with everything is super important.
Yeah, definitely agree.
For that master class, can we invite anybody if I want to invite somebody?
Yeah, yeah. It's like just have them sign up so they actually get the Zoom link. And then share it, because at the end of the day, you should be empowered, and tools like this are going to make more people excited to build stuff, and I think more and more products will start to get cheaper, right? Because why pay for that like little tool that you're using when you can maybe build something that's just for you or just for your company? And yeah, like everyone should have tools to be builders. Like we were designed to be creators. All right, I think that's it.